Hi, I'm Dr. Tiffany Rao, and I'm going to be presenting this webinar called Reaching Struggling Learners in Virtual Settings Through High Leverage Practices. Thank you for joining me. I applaud you for taking time out of your schedule to better your virtual teaching skills. And I teach in the Department of Special Education here at Cal State Fullerton. And this webinar is really geared toward any teacher who teaches students who might be struggling, whether they are identified as having a disability or just aren't quite getting the content to the level that you would like. High leverage practices are a really strong way to go in reaching some of those learners. So high leverage practices comes from special education, but it's definitely applicable beyond just special education. And I'm going to talk about how we might be able to apply those practices in some online settings. I'll share some ideas, some things that other teachers have been doing that seem to be working well. So I'm going to cover first, I'm going to define what high leverage practices are, and I'm going to define a few that I've picked out to really focus on. And then I will talk about exactly how we can apply them to virtual teaching. So what are high leverage practices, which I will refer to as HLPs? They were developed starting in 2015, so they're pretty fresh, through a collaboration between the Council for Exceptional Children, the Council for Exceptional Children's Teacher Education Division, and the Cedar Center, which is an OSEP-sponsored grant coming out of Florida. And they were approved in 2016 and then published in 2017. And they are a set of practices that were developed for all special educators to master and use in classrooms because they are supported by research to improve student outcomes significantly. So there are four kind of overarching areas or domains of the HLPs, and that is collaboration, assessment, social emotional behavior, wrapped up into one, and instruction. And within those four domains, there are 22 specific practices. I cover some of the practices that fall under the instruction domain today. And there are 12 of the 22 practices fall under the instruction domain. So you can see how heavily weighted instruction is. And I won't have time to go over all 12, so I have kind of prioritized the ones that I think would be really most relevant and applicable at this time in virtual teaching, but they are all so important. And so I encourage you to go to the website, highleveragepractices.org, and really learn about all of them if you haven't already. There are some videos that you can watch teachers in action putting these practices into place, and they're just really, really important and valuable. So here are the HLPs. Let me just read them. These are the 12 HLPs for instruction. I'm going to go ahead and read them. And the ones that I have bolded are the ones I've chosen to cover today. As I read them, I would like for you to think about, do I already do this? Now, even if you think, yeah, I already do this, I still encourage you to check it out and read more about each one, because you might be doing it to some extent, but you could go further with it. So just kind of as I'm reading, reflect on your own practices. Okay, so identify and prioritize short and long-term learning goals. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that all special ed teachers are doing this. That is very well covered in any good special ed teacher education program. And general ed, I mean, we all do this, right? Systematically design instruction toward a specific learning goal, and adapt curriculum, tasks, and materials for specific learning goals. So those first two, I would say that all good teachers are doing those. Are you doing it systematically and in a way that is very robust? That's maybe something that you could reflect on, but that's pretty well covered in a teacher ed program. Adapting tasks and materials for specific learning goals, that's going to be covered more so in a special ed teaching program. Teach cognitive and metacognitive strategies to support learning and independence. I'm going to go over this one today. Provide scaffolded supports and use explicit instruction. I'll go over both of those. Use flexible grouping. I'm going to touch on that one when I talk about direct instruction a little bit later, but I'm not going to go into it in as much depth. Use strategies to promote active student engagement. Use assistive and instructional technologies. Provide intensive instruction. And then teach students to maintain and generalize new learning across time and settings, and provide positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. So how many of those do you think you're already doing? Hopefully a lot of them, but we all have room for growth, right? Now like I mentioned direct instruction already, and I just want to say direct instruction, you get a lot of bang for your buck with direct instruction. Direct instruction covers almost all, if not all, of these practices. The only one I would say is sometimes is the use of assistive and instructional technologies. Direct instruction isn't a very tech-heavy practice, but you certainly could incorporate that, and many teachers do. So I will talk more about direct instruction later, but that is a really valuable tool that you can continue in your live lessons online, and I encourage you to do that if you're already using direct instruction. So let me just go ahead and jump into the first one that I want to go in a little bit more depth. And I am, you will see I have this bullet up here from highleveragepractices.org on every definition slide, because I just pulled straight from what they said. I really couldn't say it any better. I know the team of experts that developed the practices spent hours poring over the language so that it would be very clear and consistent for all teachers. So I just went ahead and pulled exactly the way that they said. I did chunk it into bullet points to make it a little more presentation friendly, but I just pulled it straight from them because I couldn't say it any better. So the first one I'm going to cover is teach cognitive and metacognitive strategies to support learning and independence. All right, so you probably already know this, but let me just give you the quick definition of metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about your own thinking. You can see this in practice when a teacher is on purpose thinking aloud and modeling the thinking strategies that he or she wants their students to develop. So if certain thinking skills are necessary for a particular task or concept, then teachers will often repeatedly model their own thinking. And that is one way to teach cognitive and metacognitive skills. So when we do this, we are explicitly teaching strategies to support memory, attention, and self-regulation. We want students to learn the thought processes necessary to solve problems, to regulate their own attention, to organize their thoughts, organize their materials. And we integrate these strategies into lessons through modeling and explicit instruction. So we're very clear about it. We simplify it and make it really clear and accessible for all of our students. And we also want students to learn to monitor and evaluate their own performance in relation to specific goals, and then make some necessary adjustments to improve learning. Now, this is not to say that we expect our students to be able to do this right out the gate independently. This takes a lot of teacher support and teacher modeling. And the next HLP I will cover is providing scaffolded supports. So scaffolding is a teaching approach where you provide a high level of teaching support and then systematically pull back to set your students up for success with independence. So a high level of teacher support in the beginning, because you're teaching them something presumably that they cannot yet do all by themselves. So you're going to give them a lot of support. And then as they start to master one of it, you pull away that support and keep supporting them in all the other areas, then pull away, then pull away. Systematically remove your high level of support until you get them to a level of independence. Supports can include visual, verbal, written supports, and teachers are very kind of purposeful about aligning the supports with the student's level of understanding. We want to use those supports or those scaffolds flexibly, evaluate them as we go for how effective they are, make any necessary adjustments that we need to, and then, like I said, systematically pull back. Now, some supports you're going to plan ahead. Other supports you will apply responsively during instruction. The next HLP is use explicit instruction. So for explicit instruction, we really don't want learning to be a guessing game. It should not be a guessing game. We want to set students up for success and teach them exactly what we want them to learn. So teachers will make the content, skills, and concepts very clear by showing and telling students exactly what to do or how to think through a problem and complete a task. We use this when students are learning new material and complex concepts and skills. You will see explicit instruction used a lot in reading instruction because reading is a very complex skill. And really it can be applied to anything from math to behavior to just about anything. The teacher will anticipate any common misunderstandings that might come up. The teacher's going to really prioritize the content so that they can highlight what's essential and take away anything kind of extraneous and distracting. And then again, the steps are going to be scaffolded, modeled, so that students can complete tasks with success, with mastery, and move towards independence. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to give you some specific strategies that will hopefully make come to life a little bit more, but I'm just going over the definitions for right now. This one is use strategies to promote active student engagement. So our instructional strategies, we want them to result in active student responding. I hope you can hear me. I just got a little pop-up that the internet connection is unstable. So hopefully you can hear me now. That went away. So instructional strategies should result in active student responding. And this is so important. Teachers have to invest a great deal of time in building a positive student-teacher relationship in order to foster engagement with the content and motivate students. And this is everything. I did another webinar that you can find on the same channel that you found this webinar on, just on building connections with your students online, because this is so crucial. This is the gateway to everything in education. Having that positive, strong student-teacher bond will lead to better connections with their peers and with the content. So it's so important. Do not skimp on that step. You've got to invest that time. And then the payoff will be better student engagement with the content, which leads to greater learning. We can also promote active engagement by connecting learning to students' lives and to their prior learning. We use a variety of strategies here, such as choral responding, individual responses, use of response cards or picture cards, peer-assisted learning, like peer tutoring or cooperative learning. We teach self-management, I'll go over that more, and technology to provide student engagement. And the teacher should monitor student engagement and provide a lot of feedback, both positive and constructive, to sustain performance. And I've got two more to share with you. This one is teaching students to maintain and generalize new learning across time and settings. So this is a real challenge for a lot of students in special education. Sometimes you might hear this come up at an IEP meeting or at a parent-teacher conference or just a conversation where maybe the teacher says, well, he's doing this at school, and the parent goes, well, he's not doing it at home, or vice versa. Parent says, well, she's doing this just fine at home. I don't know why she can't do it at school. And instead of looking at that as, you know, kind of this conflict or disagreement, it will be so much more effective moving forward to see that for what it usually is, which is, yes, the student probably is doing it in one setting and not generalizing it to the other setting. And there are specific approaches that we can take to fix that, to remediate that. So we want students to use their new knowledge and skills in situations other than the original learning environment. If they learn something at school, we want to really support them in performing that same task at home or out in the community, and it goes, you know, both ways as well. So we also want them to maintain new knowledge. Sometimes they might master something, but if we're not revisiting it frequently enough over time, they're going to lose it, you know, use it or lose it. So we do this by using schedules of reinforcement, providing frequent review of the content, and teaching skills that are reinforced by the natural environment beyond the classroom. So if we can have them using skills that provide some kind of positive natural reinforcement out in the community or in their homes, then we are on our way. That's what we want. That new learning is going to stick a lot better. And then finally, provide positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and their behavior. This, number one, improves the student-teacher relationship. So it circles back to that important piece. And we want to be very specific and specific in the feedback that is delivered. It should be goal-directed and very specific to the task. So not just a bunch of good jobs all day, right? We want to be really specific in our feedback. It should guide the students' learning and behavior, and it does. Good feedback will do that, and it increases motivation, engagement, independence, leads to improved student learning and improved student behavior. Feedback can be verbal, nonverbal, written. It should be timely, right away, contingent on their behavior, genuine, you know, really coming from your heart, meaningful to the student, and age appropriate, meaning obviously the kind of feedback that you give to a student in elementary school is going to look different from the kind of feedback you're going to give to a student in high school. And feedback should continue until goals are reached and sustained. Okay, so now let's get into some strategies that will utilize these instruction-related HLPs and how we can apply them to specifically online teaching. So let's start with metacognition. Okay, so these are a bunch of different strategies that you can use to explicitly teach and support cognitive and metacognitive thinking skills. Number one, access to prior knowledge. We all do that, or should be doing that with every lesson, right? Tying it to what they already know. That strengthens the neuron connections in the brain and leads to more learning, exponentially more learning when we are making those connections. So you want to guide students to ask themselves, what do I already know about this that can help me learn more? Now, when students are young or just not there yet, ready to kind of ask themselves that and really think about it, you can be modeling that and thinking aloud. What do I already know about this topic? And just model that kind of thought process with your students. The next idea that I've posted up here is ball pass. And this is normally done with a ball, but you could do this in a Zoom, in a live lesson. First, I'll tell you how it's done with a ball and then how you could do it instead in a live online lesson. So the teacher would begin holding a ball and pose a question or share an observation of some sort that's related to whatever it is you're teaching. And then the students who want to respond to that would raise their hand and the teacher would pass the ball to one student. That student responds to the teacher, whatever the question or observation was, and then adds their own contribution. Then that student chooses the next student to pass it to. The next student can respond to the teacher's original question or could just respond to what the student right before them or any of the students before them responded. So you're getting a good discussion going among students, not just teacher, student, but you would hope that it would be a little bit of teacher, student, 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 teacher, student, that sort of a thing. And it's also promoting some good cognitive thinking skills in a social way. So the way that I would do this in a, let's say, Zoom meeting is have students use the raise hand function on Zoom. You would pose a question, you wouldn't have a ball, but then you would instead just choose a student to unmute and share, and then that student could tell you who they choose, if they're able, if you can adjust it so they can see who else is raising their hands, then that student could choose the next person. And you could kind of go on like that. So it wouldn't be in person, you wouldn't have a ball, but you could still follow that same process. Force field analysis. Here's how this works. This is where students would identify a goal and describe what success would look like. Now again, if your students aren't ready for this, you can still be getting them ready for this, right? This might be a little difficult at first, but you can be modeling this. So the student would describe a goal, describe what success would look like, and then chart out hindering forces and helpful forces toward meeting that goal. What are some things that might hinder their progress toward the goal? And what are some things that would help their progress toward that goal? And then they would develop steps to reach the goal. So it's called a force field analysis. Very, very effective. And I encourage you to think about how you could modify this to elementary students and also utilize it with older students. Again, you might do it yourself for a personal goal and model it to the students and then invite them to share their goals. You could make it personal goals, or you could relate it to some content that you're teaching. I would make it personal to start with and then apply it to content that they may not be as motivated by. So start with something that's already motivating to them. Another idea for developing some cognitive strategies, and this isn't quite as much metacognitive, but certainly some cognitive strategies, this is photo captions. So students would take a series of photos related to a question that you pose or related to some content. So they could do this as homework on their own time, take pictures around their house that are related to, you know, for young kids, it might be related to the words that start with CH. Or for older kids, it could be related to some kind of an issue, a current event issue, or history, or anything. So they take some photos, one photo per student or a series of photos. And then they would ideally work together if you're able to kind of orchestrate that. Or they could work with just a partner or in small groups with you leading it or with family. And they would create captions that both describe the photo and articulate how it's connected to the question that you posed or the content that you wanted it connected to. Then you can go further with this and create a presentation, like Google Slides or PowerPoint presentation of all the photos or of just that small group or partners, and then share it with all of the students. So I really love that one. Letter to future students. So this is where you would ask your students to write a letter, or if you don't want to do a writing activity with this, you could have them create a video and have them tell, like, let's say your students next year, what should they expect to learn in your class? What might they find challenging? What, any advice that they would give? And then students can share their letters or videos and discuss. I think what would be cool with this, though, would be to apply it to our current world situation and share with, you know, students 10 years from now or 50 years from now, what it was like, what they should expect if this were to happen again, something like that. I think that could be really interesting. And it could even, you could even frame it in a way that you're helping them kind of within a framework of helping them determine what helps them learn in an online setting, right? So to future students learning in an online setting, you know, here's what's helped me learn, here's what you can expect, here's what you might find challenging. Because it is important to help students really organize their learning online, since they have to be more independent, and help them find their learning style and find what's going to work for them. So I could see that tying in really nicely to something like that. And then figurative transformation, I think, would also be really fun for a lot of students. This has like a superhero kind of a theme to it. So it's great for showcasing any personal growth, reflecting on goals, thinking creatively. You might do this at the end of a unit or at the end of a trimester, at the end of the year, or even at the end of the summer. You know, what did you learn this summer? So what you do is you ask students to imagine themselves and their transformation in a particular area. Could be something personal to them, or it could be something you provide. Like, we just finished this unit on whatever. And so they imagine themselves as a superhero, transforming into a superhero related to this content. And you would have them maybe draw themselves as a superhero and possibly describe in writing or dictate or do it on video, an account of how they changed, what was their transformation to a superhero like, the superpowers they gained, so what are their new abilities and their new strengths, and then what is their kryptonite? What are still areas for improvement or challenges that they haven't quite gotten past yet? So I love that one. And then finally, just having your students do some reflections, you know, having them habitually ask themselves, how did I do on this? What could I have done differently? What went well? What did I learn? And how will I use my new knowledge? All right, moving on to scaffolding. So the first thing that I would do to promote scaffolding is provide examples of an end product. And I really like to provide like 3 examples, a really fantastic exemplary example, an average example, this is good too, and then a poor example. And that helps so much. My college students always want samples, right? They want to see the end product. What is this supposed to look like? And so if you can imagine, if college graduate students want that, how beneficial it is for all students, right? So I highly recommend providing examples of your end product. And then you're going to structure the activity into small, manageable steps to get to that end product. Now, my college students don't always need that. Sometimes I provide that, though, depending on the level of difficulty. But for our younger students who are struggling, I encourage you to do this almost every time. Structure that activity into small, manageable steps with that end goal in sight, right there, tangible, so they know exactly where they're going to get there. And I wouldn't put down the average example. I would say both of these are very good. You know, this one went above and beyond. If you've got the energy and you've got the drive, go for it. This one is about a B, you know, whatever. Because some students just might not be ready for that exemplary example, and that's okay. You also want to provide clear and specific feedback at every step or every few steps. Modeling, prompting, cueing to individual students as needed as they progress through the steps. And then remember to step back and pull back that scaffolding as appropriate as they are progressing through those steps. Okay, so direct instruction. If you have completed our program, you got a lot of our program in special education, you got a lot of instruction on this. But let me just give you a little bit of an overview in case you're not familiar with direct instruction. So if you've seen a special education teacher teaching reading and maybe using a scripted program, then you are most likely seeing direct instruction. There's a few components of direct instruction. Number one, it's explicit. It's super clear cut. It is systematic. It goes in a very systematic order that has been developed by years of research, and it is taught to mastery. Components include flexible small groups. Students are assessed regularly, placed in small groups that align with their skill set at that time, and then reassessed a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks later, and possibly switched up in their groups so that they are always getting instruction that is most appropriate to their needs at that point in time. So that's what I mean by flexible small groups. We don't just assign them to like one of 3 groups and keep them in that group all year. No, we are going to move them around as their needs change. Signaling is very common in direct instruction and necessary to keep instruction moving and help students know when to respond. Choral response, individual responses, immediate corrective feedback. We do not let mistakes become habits. We want to catch them immediately. Scripted lessons are typically a part of direct instruction, and progress monitoring, which means frequent and quick but very sound assessments. So many teachers have been continuing their direct instruction virtually via live small group lessons. And it can be a little bit tricky. Okay, so obviously this is not a replacement for face-to-face instruction. We just cannot reach students in the same capacity online than face-to-face. One area of weakness for virtual instruction with direct instruction is the progress monitoring. Progress monitoring often can take just a few minutes per student. Once you get in the groove and you really have your routine down, you can be pulling face to face. You can set aside like a half an hour where maybe your aide is running the class or students are working on something independently, and you're pulling students, and you could probably get through most of your students in a half an hour, or maybe over a couple of days, half an hour each. It would take a lot longer online because you can't just quickly pull students. You have to schedule these individual Zoom meetings with them and be testing them, and then is it accurate? Did you have everything that you needed for the testing? So if you are not able to progress monitor, what you can do is look at your past progress monitoring data, think about how much time has gone by, where are they at now, and then maybe go back a couple of lessons to review, and then take some informal assessment of their performance, and then adjust accordingly. It's not ideal, but that's what some teachers have been doing, just to kind of make do and do the best that they can. You would continue to use choral responding and individual responses. And what I'm hearing from teachers is to be prepared for online direct instruction to take longer than it would in person. So where you might do a particular lesson within 20 or 30 minutes and finish it in one day, it might take 2 or 3 20 to 30 minute sessions to finish online. So be prepared for that. But teachers have been using, if you have digital access to your direct instruction program that you may be using, some teachers are doing that. Other teachers are taking photos of their presentation books and then sharing their screens and continuing their lessons that way. And then, and there's a couple of tools that can help. There's Pinpoint Pro, or there's some Zoom tools that will help with pointing. If you're familiar with direct instruction, pointing is really big, and we really want to zero in on where students should be focusing. So there's some tools that you can look into for that. And then if they aren't able to do that, they've been also just holding up the book. Most of the presentation books, at least in like elementary, are big. And so, you know, they're just kind of like holding up their book and doing the regular, you know, pointing like they would in class. You probably want to show your mouth because some students use that as well to comprehend what you're saying. So let me, so what I did, I just wanted to model a little bit to you. So this is not from any particular program, but it is an example of direct instruction. And I am just going to model to you how you might do this with your students. If you can imagine me with a group of students in a small group live Zoom lesson. Okay, so this is somewhat typical. Different programs kind of vary, but you might do it this way. So students sitting up nice and tall, eyes on the screen. First, you'll read the underlined part, then you'll read the whole word. Now, I'm going to point to it with my pointer, but again, I don't think this is big enough to help a lot of students exactly where you want them to focus. So I would check out the Pinpoint Pro, or check out some of the Zoom highlighting functions that you could try. So watch me first. I'll read the underlined part. Hug. Now I'll read the whole word. Hugged. So this is obviously teaching the EG ending. Let's do it all together. Ready? Let's all say the underlined part. Ready? Go. Hug. Oh, hug. Now let's read the whole word, hugged. So that would be all the students choral responding. And then you would call on individual students. So Ben, read the underlined part. Ben, hug. Read the whole word. Ben, hugged. In that example, I'm using the child's name as their signal to go ahead and read that part. Because I think that really helps to focus their attention in this kind of a setting. I don't normally do that face-to-face, but I think it's helpful. And so then as you go on, just like you would face-to-face, you would correct mistakes. When you correct mistakes, it looks like this. Okay, let's say the student read hugged for bugged. Oh, you know what? Let's try that again. Listen, bug, bugged. And you really emphasize the part that they missed, and then you have them do it again with you. And you keep going until their responses are errorless. Of course, you can't go on too long because you have to keep everybody moving. But if they are still making errors, then you might schedule some one-on-one time with them, or just be sure to come circle back to this a few more times. All right. Okay, now I want to talk about self-monitoring. So this is another great metacognitive strategy, but also helping them to monitor their own learning. You can use self-monitoring for anything, and it is so effective. There's a lot of research that shows self-monitoring is a very, very effective way to change behavior, improve behavior, but also academics and learning. So you would want to provide additional feedback, really be their cheerleader, cheering them on. And when you're giving feedback to students, you want to follow the 5-to-1 rule. For every one piece of corrective feedback that you give them, you should be making sure you're giving them 5 pieces of positive feedback. And that helps create a snowball effect of improvement in their learning, in their behavior, whatever it is you're targeting. Make feedback specific. So there's a ton of ideas online, but I know students are struggling a bit with online learning and kind of regulating their attention and their focus. So you want to really coach them through that. I did another webinar on instructional organization, where I also cover how to help students organize their own learning and kind of create an independent learning plan for themselves. So this would be a great thing to incorporate there. I made this one up, but like I said, you could apply this to anything. So how did online learning go today? They might do this at the end of every day and then share it with you. And then you can give them some pointers, give them, cheer them on, tell them they're doing great. And have you tried this to help with this area that was a struggle for you, that sort of a thing. So was I able to stay focused? They would need to rate themselves, a scale of 1 to 5. Maybe you do 1 through 3 or 1 through 10, whatever you think would be the most meaningful to your students. How many activities did I complete? Maybe they would tally up how many things they completed or worked on. How frustrated did I get? What helped me feel good today? How much did I learn? 1 through 5. What helped me focus? What made it hard to focus? How do I feel now? What will I try tomorrow? And then a few ways to promote maintenance and generalization of skills. So I encourage you to really find out what students are enjoying doing for fun at home, and then make connections between the content and some of those fun, natural activities that are happening. Similarly, connect content to their outside lives and their home lives, such as sports, church, family gatherings, grocery store trips, what have you. If you can connect it to that, that's really going to help promote generalization of skills. Share with parents what students are learning and give them some ideas on how it can be applied naturally to a variety of situations, like going to the grocery store, going to the library, even just going on a car ride. And then give some simple homework where students apply mastered concepts to a new situation. So that's about all that I have for you today. Just in summary, remember to be teaching cognitive and metacognitive skills, providing scaffolding, teach to mastery, don't make learning a guessing game, continue direct instruction through live lessons if that's something that you do, provide positive and constructive feedback, give self-monitoring a try for a variety of different learning goals, promote generalization and maintenance by communicating with parents and assigning fun and simple homework that the students might hopefully want to do, and have fun. remember to hold on to the joy of teaching, even though we're doing it in a very different way now. And here are some of the sources that I just wanted to share with you. And I really recommend checking out highleveragepractices.org to learn more about the high leverage practices. And also the Council for Exceptional Children has a really great community page if you're a member. And members have been sharing what they've been doing for virtual teaching for their students in special education. And it's just a huge wealth of resources. So I encourage you to check that out. And that's it. So thank you so much for joining me today. Bye.